Over the weekend, President Trump was asked whether he needs to uphold the Constitution as he pushes forward with a massive deportation program.
President Trump's tariffs have once again taken center stage in global trade discussions, sparking renewed debate over their scope, impact, and longevity. After announcing steep levies on a wide array of imports, from a proposed 50% tariff on European Union goods to 25% duties on foreign-made smartphones, Trump's tariff agenda has entered its second term with a vengeance. These measures not only revive the protectionist instincts of his first administration, but also expand them into new sectors, including semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and potentially copper and lumber. The administration's ambition is unmistakable: to leverage American economic power as a tool of national security and diplomatic pressure, reshaping long-standing alliances and trade relationships in the process. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. At the heart of this tariff offensive is Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, a Cold War-era provision that grants the president authority to impose duties on imports deemed a threat to national security. On March 12, 2025, Trump reinstated a blanket 25% tariff on steel imports and simultaneously raised aluminum duties from 10% to 25%. Eliminating previous country-specific exemptions that had applied under both his and President Biden's tenures. This move marked the culmination of months of increasingly hawkish rhetoric and interim investigations into the purported excess capacity of foreign producers, particularly in China, which has dominated global steel exports. By removing exemptions for longtime allies such as Canada and the European Union, the administration signaled that no partner would be spared the full weight of American economic coercion. Beyond metals, the second Trump administration has broadened its tariff portfolio under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, targeting goods that range from semiconductors to pharmaceuticals. Announcement of planned duties 25% and higher on computer chips and prescription drugs on February 18, 2025, underscored a willingness to confront even the most technologically advanced industries. While the specific legal authority for these levies remains under discussion, the strategy is clear. Use the prospect of tariffs to force foreign manufacturers into concessions on intellectual property rights, regulatory alignment, and domestic production quotas. Such sweeping measures have rattled global supply chains, prompting companies to reconsider long-term investments and prompting governments in Asia and Europe to propose countermeasures. Canada and Mexico, historically exempt under the USMCA United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, found themselves compellingly drawn back into the trade fight in early March 2025. Tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, imposed ostensibly to combat fentanyl trafficking, went into effect at 12:01 a.m. Eastern on March 4th, triggering immediate retaliatory duties from both Ottawa and Mexico City on U.S. exports such as agricultural products and vehicles. The rapid escalation strained diplomatic relations and thrown into question the durability of North American economic integration. Despite assurances from Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly that negotiations remain welcome, both sides have demonstrated little willingness to yield, suggesting a protracted standoff that may redefine the continent's trade architecture. In Europe, the shockwaves have been just as pronounced. On May 23, 2025, Trump threatened new tariffs, up to 50%, on all EU imports should Brussels fail to meet U.S. demands, including greater market access for American farmers and resolution of aircraft subsidy disputes. The EU, which supplies more than half of U.S. aluminum and two-thirds of primary steel, has responded cautiously, delaying retaliatory measures while signaling readiness to defend its industries through the World Trade Organization or through equivalent levies on American goods. Meanwhile, bilateral talks with the United Kingdom yielded a tentative framework allowing reduced tariffs on British steel and automobiles, although final details remain under negotiation. Asian economies face a similar dilemma. China and Japan, both major exporters of metals and electronics, have labored under reciprocal duties since the early days of Trump's first term. In February 2025, Beijing and Washington agreed to temporary tariff reductions. U.S. rates on Chinese goods fell from 145% to 30%, and China's duties on American products dropped from 125% to 10%, signaling a potential de-escalation amidst broader talks. Yet these cuts are ephemeral, tied to ongoing negotiations over supply chain security and intellectual property protections. Japan, for its part, has sought carve-outs for auto and electronics exports, while warning that prolonged tariffs could redirect industrial investment towards South Korea and Southeast Asia, undermining regional competitiveness. Domestically, the reinstatement and expansion of tariffs carry significant political weight. Supporters hail them as necessary corrections to decades of trade imbalance and offshoring, crediting duties with reviving steel and aluminum production and safeguarding jobs in manufacturing hubs. Critics counter that levies on intermediate goods, particularly semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, will drive up costs for downstream industries, stifle innovation, and fuel inflation for consumers already grappling with higher prices. Agriculture, too, feels the pinch. American farmers worry that foreign buyers, stung by U.S. tariffs on other products, will retaliate by sourcing crops and livestock from rival exporters, eroding farm incomes. The legal underpinnings of Trump's tariff program have also come under intense scrutiny. Trade law experts point out that the administration's efforts to prevent tariff stacking, prioritizing auto duties over drug and steel levies when multiple authorities apply, represent a novel interpretive approach to existing statutes. Meanwhile, affected industries have filed lawsuits challenging the legality of broad-based reciprocal tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act (IEEPA), arguing that IEEPA was never intended to address chronic trade deficits. Federal courts have issued mixed rulings, with at least one judge blocking the administration's attempt to bar foreign students from universities, a case that, while unrelated to tariffs, reflects judicial willingness to curb executive overreach. Global supply chains, already strained by pandemic fallout and geopolitical tensions, face further disruptions as companies scramble to adapt. Multinational corporations are re-evaluating sourcing strategies, shifting production to tariff-free regions, or investing in tariff engineering, altering product specifications to qualify for exemptions. This realignment is costly and time-consuming, potentially delaying product launches and complicating logistics. For small and medium enterprises, which lack the resources for complex compliance measures, the tariffs present an existential challenge, forcing some to downsize or exit export markets altogether. In Washington, Congress remains deeply divided over the scope of presidential trade authority. While some legislators have proposed bills to rein in unilateral tariffs, others are pushing for even broader powers to impose duties on environmental grounds or to counter currency manipulation. The coming months will likely see intense lobbying from industry groups, labor unions, and foreign governments eager to influence the legislative agenda. Any adjustments to the Trade Expansion Act or Trade Act could fundamentally reshape executive legislative dynamics in trade policy making. Looking ahead, the trajectory of Trump's tariff regime will hinge on two interlocking factors: the progress of bilateral and multilateral negotiations, and the political winds of midterm and presidential elections. Should meaningful agreements emerge, whether a new US-EU trade deal or a settlement with China, some levies may be dialed back. Conversely, if talks falter, the administration has signaled willingness to escalate, potentially targeting entirely new categories such as digital services and e-commerce. In either scenario, the global economy must contend with an era in which trade barriers are wielded as instruments of strategic policy rather than relics of protectionism's past. For businesses and consumers alike, the imperative is clear: stay nimble, monitor developments closely, and diversify supply chains to mitigate tariff risks. Governments, meanwhile, face a delicate balancing act between defending domestic industries and preserving open markets that drive innovation and growth. Amidst this uncertainty, one truth remains constant. Trump's tariffs are not a fleeting chapter, but a defining feature of 21st century trade policy, reshaping economic relationships and testing the resilience of globalization itself. Continuing the exploration of Trump's tariff strategy, attention turns to its cascading effects on sectors far beyond steel and aluminum. One particularly profound arena of impact is the automotive industry. Long accustomed to lean, just-in-time manufacturing, U.S. automakers have faced a stark choice: absorb higher material costs, pass them along to consumers, or relocate production to tariff-free jurisdictions. In response, several major manufacturers have announced plans to bolster assembly plants within Mexico, leveraging the still favorable provisions of the USMCA for vehicles whose final assembly occurs south of the border. Yet this maneuver carries its own risks. Long supply chains remain vulnerable to political shifts,